Welcome to CEFEL's Unpacking series, with a focus on...
My name's Gary Aubin. I'm just going to talk to you briefly about the Green Paper and what it might mean for schools in particular and for the wider system around SEND. I wrote a book last year called The Lone SENCO, which is a handbook for SENCOs, which I've had some lovely feedback about. But when I'm not doing that, I manage provision for children with SEND for a multi-academy trust, and I work with the Education Endowment Foundation as their content specialist for SEND. So, the SEND review was a long time in waiting, wasn't it? We waited a long time, over 2 years, I think, since it was initially announced. So they've come up with this document, the SEND review, right support, right place, right time. It came out on the same day, I believe, or the same week, certainly, as the white paper. And so the two do sort of speak to each other a bit. And I think the thing that it does best is it really talks very honestly about the size of the problem. I think it really, if it tried to say that things are fine and that people are happy, I think it would be the biggest scandal. What it does, it says there's a real problem, and essentially the system isn't working for children and young people with SEND, certainly not working for their parents. It's not working financially for local authorities, and ultimately it's not improving outcomes for children and young people. And so, it really isn't working, isn't fit for purpose. So it really looked at the, it's really identified an enormous problem and tried to talk through how we'll put it right. Being a green paper, of course, it's just a consultation document at the moment, but still it offers some quite some quite sweeping changes. And certainly you could argue that it's more sweeping and more drastic than the changes outlined in the white paper, many of which had been announced already. So in terms of schools, if I sort of speak firstly to schools and school leaders and what the green paper might mean for schools. So the first thing is the SEND NPQ. So just to start there, obviously that will, there's a statutory qualification now, the SENCO award, and SENCOs need to have that within 3 years of being qualified. And that the consultation suggests that will end and that it will be replaced with a SEND NPQ. It's called Leadership SENCO NPQ. I don't know what the name will end up being, but and it has to be, the wording is that the person, your SENCO, has to be in the process of obtaining the qualification when taking on the role. So whereas they could previously decide, actually, I might do the role for a year and then enroll when I feel like I've got a sort of better grip on things, that's now not an option. Okay, so that's sort of one change there. And it talks about, within the green paper, improving SENCO's leadership expertise. So it does talk directly about, we want to make this, we want the SENCO to be a leadership role in particular. It doesn't state in the green paper anywhere that the SENCO has to be an SLT. It uses very similar language to in the current iteration of the SEN Code of Practice, where it recommends it, it suggests it, and then leaves it up to a school whether they make that choice or not. Talking about the Code of Practice, that will clearly need to be redrafted, and there'll be changes, I'm sure, to the Children and Families Act as a result of whatever goes from the green paper to then get passed into legislation. So there will be a new SEND Code of Practice, and we can second guess some of those changes. But that will be something that clearly many members of staff in your school will have to have a fresh look at when that gets redrafted. The EHCP process, there's a big change to that. Clearly now, as we know, we have different systems with each local authority, and it will be standardized, it will be digitized. And that does sound very positive, I think. If we link at the, if your school is on a border in particular of different local authorities, it can be really tough just to work out which paperwork you're doing for whom. And so it acknowledges that issue and says it's going to be one standardized process. But also it talks about how problematic it can be when EHCPs are 40 pages long and doesn't offer really any can't be a used and working document. So there's that balance where parents' views are heard, the views of the young people are heard, that there's some useful guidance in there, but it also maintains conciseness where it can. Consultations for school places is clearly going to change. So in the new system at the moment, I'll read from the green paper, it says that parents will express an informed preference for a suitable placement. So there'll be a list of placements that the local authority will have approved that parents can choose from, and if they choose from them, then they will get that place. So actually schools won't have those 14 days to respond to a consultation anymore, but it seems also that parents won't be able to pick from any school that they believe is appropriate. So there's a slight change there, and I think that would be one that really that remains quite high profile, because what does that mean for independent specialist schools in particular? We wait to see on that. There should be fewer tribunals because there's enforced mediation. I think that's, again, something that not all parents have responded very happily to this. I'm not a parent of children with SEND myself, so I won't sort of comment on that. But with mediation being a sort of compulsory part of any process of challenge, Hopefully it does mean that, it does bring about, things can be solved a bit more quickly without always going to court. Though, I know some parents will need that and will feel that this just slows them down from the tribunal that they feel they need in order to get the provision in place that they would like to. But that's in the green paper, is that mediation becomes a compulsory part of the process if an EHCP is being challenged. Multi-academy trusts, of course, that's, we've seen in the white paper a commitment from the government that every school will become an academy, will exist within trust. And so, that I've seen really positive examples of where that helps, of where I was talking with you, Emily, just now about how SENCOs often sort of start in the role and can feel very isolated. It's certainly the theme of my book, really, is what to do when you haven't got that level of help and support within your school. So, so there can be, it may be that there are positive leaps forward in terms of bringing SENCOs together in some cases, though of course the local authorities already fulfill that role in some areas that I am aware. National standards, that promises to be quite significant, I think, for schools. So it talks about national standards for SEND as a way to reduce the variation across different localities. So it talks, for example, around assessment and identification and having national standards that should help us all to understand a bit more clearly what constitutes a child being on a SEND register, remaining on a SEND register, or coming off a SEND register. So I see that as a really positive thing. It also talks about, in terms of provision, what are the national standards in terms of what schools should do for provision. I think that's a really positive step. I think there is a danger related to that it becomes a stick with which to beat SENCOs a bit. And if it becomes a list of 200 strategies in there, then of course, actually, how are we helping teachers to do a small number of things that constitute an inclusive lesson at the universal level, making some exceptions where there are individual needs that aren't sort of met with really high quality, adaptive, inclusive teaching. But that's what, that's what that would be the concern there. And then finally, it talks about TAs, and there will be guidance on how to use and deploy TAs. I suggest that it won't differ greatly from what we know already about TA practice from the Making Best Use of Teaching Assistants, for example, from the EEF. There are lots of things. I'll stop there in terms of going through the green paper. There are lots of things that are very significant, but are really much more significant for local authorities and for parents in particular. But what I've tried to just capture there, trying to be brief, though it's difficult, isn't it, is sort of walk through some of the greatest implications for schools. So I hope that's been helpful, Emily, Lorraine.